23, Lynchburg City School Board work session to order. And as we bring our school board meeting to order, I would like to first, in section B, seek the approval of the agenda as it has been featured to board members. What is the pleasure of the board to approve the agenda before us tonight?
I move that we approve the agenda.
We have a motion by Dr. Carter, seconded by Dr. Brennan. Any further questions or discussion? Then, Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the agenda approval.
School Board Member Ms. Preston?
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Trost?
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Sinha?
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Brennan?
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Carter?
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Gupta?
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Day?
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Andrews?
Yes.
Motion carries.
We're going to stand now and share in our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dr. Edwards, we are certainly thankful for all of these nice things that are in front of us. Do you want to say anything about any of that real fast?
Of course, it continues to be School Board Appreciation Month, and as you know, at our last meeting, we were very appreciated. So what a wonderful surprise to come in and get even more gifts from our students, our staff, talented folks. And some of them are just really creative in what they've done with recycled materials. Just shows you the creativity and the genius of our kids and staff. So to my folks out there, thank you so much for just taking the time to show a little love to the school board and myself.
Since there are no board comments tonight, board, let's give all of the people who gave us. Thank you, Dr. Edwards, and your incredible team. This also happens to be School Board Clerk Appreciation Month as well. And what we would like to do is pause ever so briefly, but there's lasting value in this brief moment on behalf of our wonderful clerk. And so first of all, I would like to read a certificate, a tradition of excellence for all Lynchburg City schools. Whereas school board clerks in each locality throughout our great Commonwealth are appointed by law to fulfill their duties and responsibilities. Whereas school board clerks are responsible for keeping accurate records of the meetings and proceedings of the school board, a record of all receipts and disbursements, and a record of all official acts. And whereas school board clerks perform such other duties in connection with the school business of his or her county or city as may be required by the school board. And whereas school board clerks maintain frequent contact with the public, including parents, employees, and the media on behalf of the school board and superintendent. And whereas school board clerks in the performance of their duties are often required to work extra hours attending school board meetings. And whereas school board clerks join with other school boards to help ensure that students achieve to their highest potential. And whereas school board clerks provide an invaluable service for school board members and superintendents, the Virginia School Board Association Board of Directors does hereby recognize the third week of February as School Board Clerk Appreciation Week in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And whereas the Lynchburg City School Board joins the VSBA in recognizing the many and varied contributions of school board clerks, now therefore be it resolved that at its meeting on the 21st day of February 2023, the Lynchburg City School Board also recognizes the third week of February as School Board Clerk Appreciation Week and recognizes our school board clerk, Tina Day, signed by yours truly and Dr. Bob Brennan, Vice Chair of our board. And we want to, at this time, present you with this certificate, and on behalf of the entire board, all 9 of us, this certificate, these flowers, a card, and something in the card, we want to give it to you now to say thank you, Tina, for the great work that you provide for each of us and our board collectively.
Thank you, sir.
Are we jumping on that? You all may not know that in addition to serving the school board, she also serves
Yes,
as
ma'am.
superintendents and directors and everybody else. So we jumped in on that celebration to recognize you too, and we have a little small gift for everything that you do. And just in case you forgot, we remind you.
There's a whole lot of stuff in there, Dr.
Everything that you
Dr. Coleman, your stuff is on top there then. Just leave my basket alone.
Oh, wow. Come on, school board, we're doing this
Yes.
together. Let's thank her for all the great work. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for everything you do. You're great.
Thank
So
you.
good.
Thank you for that, Dr. Edwards. I don't want to leave, if anybody had a burning statement they wanted to make, I don't want anybody to feel left out of the corporate discussion. Okay, very good. Thank you, Tina, we love you. Thank you for your
Thank you, sir.
outstanding work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, that will now move us to section C in our work session, notice of a closed meeting. And tonight, board members, I would like for us pursuant to the Code of Virginia, section 2.23711A7, that the school board needs to convene a closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following specific matters: legal consultation regarding the declaration of unitary status. Is there a motion for us to go into closed meeting?
So move.
Second.
Been moved by School Board Member Truss, seconded by Dr. Carter, that we will go into closed meeting for the stated reason. Any further questions or discussion on the motion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll now for us to go into closed meeting with approval.
School Board Member Ms. Preston.
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Truss.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Sinha.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Brennan.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Coleman.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Carter.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Gupta.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Day.
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Andrews.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, as is our custom, the board will retire to room 206 and deliberate with great prudence. And then to our public, we'll be right back down as soon as we've completed that discussion. Thank you, board members. I'm going to go upstairs to room 206.
Dr. Carter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Carter.
She's in the restroom.
Wait for her. Been moved by Preston, second by Dr. Day, that we would come out of closed meeting. Any further questions regarding that motion? If not, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
School Board Member Ms. Preston. School Board Member Mr. Charles.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Sinha.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Brennan.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Coleman.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Carter.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Gupta.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Day.
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Andrews.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Lynchburg City School Board would now like to certify that in the closed meeting just concluded, that nothing was discussed except the matter or matters stated for the Code of Virginia, Section 2.23712D. Number one, specifically identified in the motion to convene on a closed meeting, and two, lawfully permitted to be so discussed under the provision of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act cited in that motion. Will now certify. Madam Clerk?
School Board Member Ms. Preston.
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Charles.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Sinha.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Brennan.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Coleman.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Carter.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Gupta.
Yes.
School Board Member Dr. Day.
Yes.
School Board Member Mr. Andrews.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And under Section D tonight of our work session, where the bulk of what we're doing is going to take place, these are all discussion information for tonight. And Dr. Edwards, if you could lead us through number one.
Certainly. So our first item is a discussion on the mid-year academic update, and we have Mr. Coleman here to talk with us a little bit about where we are and things that we are doing to help our children succeed. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards, and good evening to the board. I've also enlisted the support of our data analyst, Chuck, and so he's going to join me as well. The presentation that I'll share tonight, it is similar to the presentation that I shared in January, and more of a continuation of that information, only with the update with information from our winter SOL assessment scores, growth assessment scores. Before we get into that, I just want to share a little bit about this test, because this SOL growth test is a new test for our division. This is the first time that we've rendered this test in this way, and so as we continue to learn more about the implementation of this assessment in the years to come, and align what we do to what the legislation calls for from the VDOE, will anyway, I invited Chuck to help for us to share knowledge, because again, this is new. But if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those questions, and I know that there were some questions that were submitted, and so I'll talk through that as a part of my presentation as well. So we'll just start off with, again, this presentation you've seen before, but as we move from the conversation around learning loss into our conversation around learning recovery, we'll talk through, I don't know if this slide is moving, but I'm on slide 3 all right. Great, and then in slide 3, just to give an overview of how gaps are measured by the VDOE, and in our presentation tonight, we'll talk about where we are with some of those gaps, and then again, strategies toward the end of the presentation. We'll discuss how we aim to close those gaps. For the purposes of tonight, on slide 4, we use performance and achievement indicators as bulleted here on this slide with our reading and SOL scores. IXL, we look at attendance and graduation rate, and then participation in CETE programming. These SOL growth scores are not the reading and math SOL pass-fail scores that we would typically present. So it's important that I share that, again, this assessment is a growth assessment, and it is not the same as the 400 pass score, pass-fail score. So I know that there were some questions about that and wanted to clarify that. So this slide here has both our reading growth and math growth scores, and it compares the performance of our students from the fall to our winter. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at this, and what we'll talk through is the growth that we see in every subgroup that we have disaggregated in this slide by race, and we'll talk about other demographics in a couple of slides. But here you'll see the lowest score that students score. So right under, let's look at winter growth assessment. So in the box under reading growth, under winter growth assessment, you see a number 1,116, and then the next number you see 1,699. So what those numbers represent is the lowest score that a student would have earned, and then that next number, that 1,699, is the highest score. And then what you see in those boxes under there will be the average score of students. And so we'll break this out a little bit more in the plots, in the jitter plot charts to follow, but just want to give you a moment to see that in each of these categories, we see growth from how students performed on this assessment in the fall, both in reading and in math, and then how they performed in the winter.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Please.
Here's our challenge. We weren't told a score will be between 900 and 2,000. We were just given scores. And then we weren't really told where a 400 passing SOL score would meet. So all we can really do is compare kids' scores to other kids' scores in the building. The closest we'll get to any information like that will be mid-March, which is right before SOLs. So this is the first time we've played with this data. So when I say, the range from 970 to 1943, those are the scores that we received, but they don't give you a true bottom or top to measure off of. So Dr. Sinha will tell you, it's kind of like starting a race and being told, we're going to have you run for a while, but we'll let you know where you're going to stop later on. So the positive out of this, if we say what problem are we trying to solve, is growth is growth. We don't know how much is good or bad, but it's almost all across the board is growth, is what we saw, which was really what we were looking for. And primarily, we were looking for ways to target our instruction as we move forward based on what appears to be a deficiency within the system. We don't know how we perform compared to the rest of the state yet. We did get that for the fall. But again, they just said, your scores fell in about this range. But we don't know if everybody in the state did horribly. So that's why these numbers aren't as clear and obvious as, say, an SOL pass rate, if that makes any more sense.
Do we get to see a distribution curve of each?
Yes, we're going to show you some of that as best we can.
All right.
Yeah.
We can go to the next slide where we can, and this is, I guess I'll give the caveat to, and this is less of a distribution curve, but the jitter plot that I believe at our previous board meeting was asked for us to show the distribution of student performance. Again, I'll say that this is all schools, and so when we look at these next couple of slides, it's important for me to mention that some schools' data will look different, and so where we see the median or average performance overall is not the same as what we would see in some of our other schools.
Now, what is the scale across the bottom? What are the horizontal axis? What are those numbers?
Yeah, so if you've never seen this before, this is getting really fancy. This is called a B-swarm jitter plot, which is a word I didn't even know last year, which is exciting. So basically what it does is I chose 0 as the center line. That's that gray line is no growth. So we took the fall score as the average, which would fall on that, and then the box and whisker chart kind of shows where the median or where the new average moves up or down. So every dot represents an actual score, a student score on there. And so the box and whisker plot shows us where the median is and then shows us that second and third quartile growth.
It shows a score or a difference between two scores?
Those are actual individual scores.
So these are raw scores?
Yes. And in the
Then they
software,
should be
if
0 to 600.
Pardon?
Then they should be 0 to 600.
No, because we don't get a score of 0 to 600. We would normally, if it were an SOL score, we'd get a 200 to a 600. All we get is a vertically scaled score, which on the other test ran between 900 and 2,000.
Then I'm really confused. I don't know what scores we are seeing here.
This is the what's called the vertically scaled score. So last spring when we got a test, we would get, a kid got a 425, and they would say that also equates to a 1560 on this other score. They're not giving us the 400, they're just giving us the other. So I just measured the difference between their fall score and their winter score, and charted the change in that.
What is the other score?
As I'm,
What is the other score?
the fall and the winter, the two
You
SOL
just said
growth.
that we would get a, as.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So last spring, we were given 2 scores for a student for every test they took. We got their pass-fail score, which was between 200 and 600, with 400 being passing. And then we also got what I believe they called a vertically scaled score, which ran between 900 and 2,000.
So is that just a rescaling of the score from 0 to 600?
I'm not entirely sure how they came up with those numbers. They didn't really ever tell us what that number was supposed
So
to
we
represent.
don't know what those numbers mean.
We can assume that they related based on some scales that they gave us last year. They said that, they gave us ranges of 1 through 8.
Yeah.
And so a stage 5 gave you a range of, and it was different for every grade for every test. It would say, passing a 400, you're gonna get a scale of like 1350 to 1510. How they determined those ranges, I don't entirely know. None of them matched up. They weren't equally distributed.
So it's kind of a mystery to us what those numbers actually are.
It is a mystery to all of us, and when I've asked the state, what they've said is, we just want you to use it to measure kids against each other, but they aren't telling us if that is good or bad. All we can do is tell you how fast with this data the kids are running around the track relative to each
I'm not
other.
criticizing you, I'm just frustrated because I don't know what the numbers
I am
represent.
100% in agreement with you, and that's been our challenge. And that was one of the things we talked about is, how do I go to a school and say, this is good growth or bad growth? I can't. But what I can do is look at the different groups in the different schools. So this is a specific piece of software you may have seen before called Flourish. It does have filtering across the top, so I can compare schools to schools for growth. So it does let us do some of those kinds of things. This is not anywhere near the level of dissection we would want if we wanted to target it, but we do have a different tool that we're going to show you that we're using for that.
Kim?
So if I'm understanding this correctly then, so taking black students, that bottom distribution, about a third did less well.
That's correct.
Okay. Do we have any clues as to why? I mean,
One of the challenges with this test is that it's much shorter than an SOL. It is still CAT adaptive, so when you take a test that's going to range around 20 questions, and when you get kids that may take questions, that may have only 16 or 17 questions, the data becomes much less accurate. It's kind of hard to know what to make out of some of this.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead, Randy.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood exactly what we were looking at.
This was a difficult problem. I was really trying to find a way. One of the things we were looking for with this specific graph is, are we looking at a fairly even distribution? Because I was really curious to see if we'd get big clumps of kids that showed huge growth and big clumps of kids that were, you know what I mean? Kind of looking at
Well, it's somewhat reassuring that all in all, the black kids,
the mirrors everything.
it's comparable in terms of, this is why you need to see the distribution.
Yes.
Because if you just looked at the mean or the percent passing or the number who had showed growth, then the white would come out far better than black. But here we can see that for both groups, and for the groups of any reasonable size, there's a sizable subset, about a third, 25% to a third, that had learning loss,
And that's what
if you will,
So to the left.
based on this measure
Right, and
alone.
that's another challenge. We assume that based on thinking that the two tests can be compared evenly against each other. The state has said they don't like that idea, and I've thought, why would
So
you give
what-
two identical tests and say
Yeah.
that maybe you don't compare the two of them?
It's almost as if they're on a deliberate path to obscure.
I'm assuming they're just crunching data this year, and next year they'll really have a much more fleshed out explanation for
Because
how we might use them.
Yeah, because if it's not a comparable kind of apples to show improvement, then how's a teacher supposed to use?
Well, the good news is we have other tools for that. We are using ISL. We just finished the last snapshot last week. That data came into me today about 10 o'clock. I just wasn't able to turn it around for you, but that does give us much more real-time, this grade level, and breaks it into some other things like that. This is really useful if we want to compare those different demographics. Now, what I did here is I did take grades 3 through 8 reading and threw them all in. So,
Yeah.
because again, I could have hit you with 80 graphs, but I think you would have probably asked me.
No, but I really like this particular graph because we see that central tendency, the middle 75%, which is, in that box. But then we see the full distribution, and the distributions overlap. Whereas if you're only looking at the mean, which is what we focus on,
Right.
they look like they're really far apart. But when you see that there's actually quite a lot of overlap, that performance gap, such that it is, and it's still an area of concern, doesn't look so alarming.
And as we segue to our,
And Mr. Coleman, before you go forward, Randy, did you have something you want to?
Just real quickly, make sure, and this may be too simplistic, everything to the left of the zero axis is no growth or regression?
Negative, yes.
True, okay, okay.
And we didn't establish this before we started, and I should have. What is the pleasure of the board around the report? Do you think it would be wise for them to go through their report and may answer some questions that you may or may not have? And then we answer, or do you want to continue in this fashion with asking on each slide?
Are you asking if we should hold questions to the end? Is that what?
Yes.
I think you should
Let's-
just go through the
let's
presentation.
hold our questions
Okay.
to the end, and I guarantee they will do the best they can to answer each of them.
And,
Dr. Evans?
and slides are numbered, so if you just jot something down, like on slide 7, and then we could go back quickly.
Okay, Mr. Coleman, thank you.
all right. The next slide is our reading growth, and there is some concern about, we can see math growth from the previous slide. We see significant growth. We don't see that growth, according to this assessment and this data, to be as significant as we saw with math growth. And I know the question might be, do we know why that is? And the answer is, it is too soon to definitively say why we don't see growth accelerated in the area of reading in the same way that we do for math. But the distribution, anyway, as the point was raised regarding the previous slide, we see pretty even and comparable distribution across racial identity for our students across the division. Slide 8 is the numerical representation of the chart that you will see following the next slide. And this has our students identified by students who qualify for free and reduced lunch or identified as economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and our English language learner students. And so again, in both reading and math, we see that if we were to compare fall growth to our winter growth, in each of these areas, we see growth that would be considered statistically significant.
So, Mr. Coleman, just under economically disadvantaged, it says N is 18,000, that's probably a typo.
That is a typo. Yeah.
What should it be?
I believe it's 18, I'd have to go back up. It's about 1,800.
Yeah, that 6 shouldn't be there. It's 1829, so the 6 shouldn't be there. All right, and then the next chart, if we move on to the next slide, we can look at the reading growth. This is for students who are identified or as economically disadvantaged. I'll just give you a moment to see that. All right, anything you want to say about this?
No, the goal here was just to kind of, because we've not used data in this way before, we wanted you to get a sampling of this. We do have more in a presentation that we could share that allows you to break it down in school and has some filtering pieces, but I didn't want you to see 60 slides, but this is what it looks like if we just look at a single group. Again, as a teacher or as a division person, I say, okay, I need to start picking out the kids that are on the left side of this, and that's where we need to start creating subgroups and looking at other trends. So we would take that as the first point and then jump off into one of the next things that we're going to show you as to how we target kids specifically. But again, this speaks to a pretty valid test because we're looking at a fairly even distribution. We're not seeing real odd clumps.
All right, and then our next slide, we'll look at reading growth by grade. And so starting with grade 3 at the bottom and then going up to grade 8 at the top, We see that students who are in the third grade demonstrated the most growth, and we see the least amount of growth, according to this assessment and this data, we see the least amount of growth in grade 8. So I'll just give you a moment to take a look at that. Anything you'd like to.
I see that.
Yeah, so it would stand to reason that third grade would show the most growth because they're working with the smallest amount of information, so you have fewer overall ideas you're trying to master. What this tells me is that grades 6 and 8 need the most work, but that correlates to the work we're doing at the middle schools already, and it just reinforces that we are looking at fairly good data here, but that they aren't making the same kinds of progress that they are. But sometimes these graphs can also point out the obvious, meaning it's worth talking to 4th and 5th grade teachers and saying, what are you doing that you feel like is working right? What are the things that maybe we need to go back to the middle school teachers and say, I know kids feel like they're older, but these are some strategies that seem to still be successful. And so it opens some conversations.
All right, and then going to the next slide, and this is probably one of the most useful pieces of information that I think our teachers and our school teams can use. And this is just an example, and I know it might be difficult to see that as it's displayed, but I'll talk to you about what you're looking at. Teachers and teams in schools that want to get a sense of how students are performing in certain strands or how did they respond to certain questions. This type of information, and we will present this and share this with each school and school team, this is an example of the level of detail that teachers and teams can have as it pertains to student performance on specific questions. And so if they were to notice that a large number of students got a question incorrect, like if we were to look at, and these questions aren't numbered, but so I'll just pick one, model fractions and mixed numbers. If we see that there were 59 incorrect, responses there, this would help. This would identify for a teacher an area to target. Or if we see, identify points, line, segment, raise, and angles, and we only see 2 correct responses. So this gives teachers very clear information about content that they would want to focus on in instruction, content that they would want to focus on in acceleration or targeted intervention based on how they see students responding. And so while it is true that there is a growth score that students will get from these SOL test data, what they also get, though, is very clear, almost down to the student, how students are responding to each question, and that will let a teacher know how to design instruction to meet the needs of students based on how they responded in these questions. Chuck, is there anything more you want to say about that?
This is the part I get really excited about, because when a school says we just finished grade 3 math testing, I can have this ready the next day. It's broken down by school, by class, so they're looking at their own data. We can even bring it out by teacher if we need to. The state reporting gives us by student already. They do get a piece of paper that can be handed out. But as a teacher, this shows me several things. It says if I take that top 6 lines, that's where my kids struggled. But you've got to look at the numbers. For instance, if you look at the very last question, has an 83% accuracy rate, which sounds awesome. Only 6 kids saw that question, which tells us it's a field test question, which means it didn't count. Right? That means they didn't know what the question was going to look like, so they threw it in there. We've never been able to determine what field test questions were before when we gave tests. We can look at every test question now by kid and say, this is where we need to remediate. So as a grade level in a building, you can look and say, we all killed it when we did multiplication facts. Somehow, if you look at solve problems involving addition, 23% pass rate, 124 times that question was asked. This is just one school's data. We've got to talk about how we did that. But we might also talk to the other schools and say, yours was 70. What does your unit look like that you guys did the same amount of time? My kids didn't do well and yours did. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So this went to every school by grade, by subject, as soon as they told me the test was done, but certainly some didn't. And so they all have this now. And I do that as soon as the tests are done. So we have that for the fall and for the winter. So they have 2 really strong data points for which they can start to do spiraling of their materials.
So as we go to the next slide, the point that Chuck just raised is an example of how we could strategically use this data to, first of all, design core instruction, but then also to identify students who might need additional support or students who are mastering skills and are ready for additional challenge. And so, again, this data is very new. We just got this last week, and so we have not had an opportunity to go to each school, and my style for presenting this is to spend time with each school leader and their teams to go through their school's data, similar to how we did with our academic review data. So rather than send them an email or a folder and say, here's your data, we sit down, we bring our instructional supervisors, our instructional leaders. I join those meetings as well, and we look through all of the school's data, and we not only just look at how students are doing, but we connect this to each school's school improvement plan and some of their goals around student performance and priorities. And so those are ways that we use this data beyond discussion points for our board meeting and with our community, but then also really using these to inform instruction and additional needs for support that might exist at each school. In the coming weeks, we'll talk through an instructional coaching model that we are bringing forward to improve the quality of instructional coaching, the frequency of instructional coaching that our teachers have access to. And again, this data will help us get a sense of, for example, if we need targeted math instructional coaching in 8th grade based on the data that we see. This helps us deploy our instructional coaches and embedded professional development in the grade levels that we see student performance as a troubled area. And so, again, this is a slide that you've seen before, but just wanted to bring this into the conversation to show how we would use this data to continue our efforts. And again, I continue to frame this as a marathon. We have a significant amount of work over time that we must commit to. And so on this last slide, these 4 priorities that you see here are priorities that we'll maintain over time to continue to accelerate growth that we see in our schools. Good. All right. Now at this time, if there are questions or ongoing discussion.
Well, much of that I got, but you all gonna ask the questions. Dr. Brennan?
So much of that I didn't get. Help mentor me some, but I want to make a couple of points. One is that for those who have not been on the board very long, we've always talked about getting data, and we never have data like this in the past. And ultimately, a number of years ago, we would just see SOL scores in September of the following year and work off of those. So I think this is, I know it's early data. I know that we have to work on it, but I think it's at least a step in the right direction. So thank both of you for doing that. So a couple of quick questions. One is that this impressive list of the 3rd grade math that you just went through, these items, some of these are very impressive. Are these from this current test, or is this from IXL,
No, that's right off the test. Those are actual
Off this
from
test.
the winter growth by strand, so that they can go back and look it up in the curriculum. They even ask questions sometimes that kids haven't reached yet, based on how they do. So that lets teachers see, okay, this one scored really low. That's 2 weeks away. I don't care. Or this one's really high and it's 2 weeks away. But those kids mastered some of that skill, and I maybe can shorten that unit and add back in some time on one of the things we covered where I need to make up some time.
Right, sure. And Mr. Coleman, soon to be Dr. Coleman, we hope.
Tomorrow's the big day.
You commented about the difference between reading and math, and I think we saw this last year too with SOLs. And is this, you're not looking at this specific test, but from the viewpoint of teaching, and maybe Dr. Edwards or you all can help me with this, but do you expect more growth in the math area as compared to reading as far as the way that they are taught and the issues that are raised by the 2 different areas? Because I think we saw this in SOLs also in last year.
My experience has been literacy and reading is complex in different ways when you compare that to math. And so just by virtue of the difference in complexity between the 2 areas, we will often see major differences in growth. What I will say in addition to that is you will often hear us and hear me talk a lot about the work we're doing in literacy because we know that it is more difficult to achieve literacy growth year to year than it is for math, and that's not an LCS specific phenomenon. That is what I see across the nation. Just math growth seems to occur faster and more often than we see literacy growth. I don't know why that is, but that's what I've always seen, at least in the last 15 years of studying this.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the information. Thank you.
We do hope to monitor that a little bit. I would love to take some of the data we have the end of the year and see how much slide we're getting, because I have a suspicion that kids tend to read more on their own over the summer. And my son loves math, but I've never seen him do math when he had free time. And so I'm wondering if we aren't losing a little bit more over the summer, and so we're gaining because we have had that slide. But until I run the numbers, I can't.
Thank you very much.
Hard to defend that statement.
Dr. Day?
Yeah, could we go back to page 5 of the presentation? So when you began your presentation, you talked about that there was something that was new. Is that this assessment that's producing these numbers?
Yeah, so the growth assessment is new, so, and I'll just share briefly this information from the VDOE website. I know I shared it with you, but it's worth communicating to the board. So that we're in our second year of implementation of this growth assessment. And the first year where we're assessing like this was winter and fall. So beyond the legislation, we're required that students in grades 3 through 8 in their reading and math growth assessments be administered once in the fall and once in the winter. So that's new for us this year. And then unlike the 2021 fall growth assessments that was presented last year, this year's assessments focus on content that students are going to get this year, whereas last year's fall growth assessment focused on what students got in the previous year. So they're different assessments, and that's why we didn't compare last year's assessment even to this, because they're totally different tests.
But as I understood your response to my questions earlier, we're not real clear how those assessment numbers are arrived at.
Not yet.
So we don't know really what a 1499 is.
We don't.
So, I mean, I really have a hard time putting much significance on numbers where I don't know where they came from. And I'm not criticizing you. I understand that the state hasn't told you, but that undermines all of this in my mind.
Perhaps, or what it tells us at least is we know what the lowest score was that a student
Yeah,
got.
but we
and
don't know what
the
that low
highest
score is.
We don't.
Don't know what it.
I would say this, though, what it does tell us is when we compare Asian students to black students, or when we compare the different groups, we are looking at the same sets of data, so it can point out different deficiencies in terms of how we're addressing students of race or other demographics.
Maybe if whatever this assessment is really meaningful, and we're assuming it is.
That's a question for the
Yeah,
state.
see, I
It's a
don't know.
really short assessment, which is the other part that makes it difficult.
Let's see. Could we go to slide 11, please? So on the very last side, I don't know what the term strands and spiraling means. Can you
Oh,
explain
absolutely.
that to me?
Well, you can take
No,
it.
go for it.
Oh, so a strand is a single, it's kind of the smallest unit of information that we're trying to teach. So identify the likelihood of an event as a strand. In the SOLs, it actually has its own code, and then it describes what kids should be able to do and what success looks like. And so these are the types of questions broken down. So that isn't an actual question. When it says tell time to the nearest minute, that means any and all questions that ask kids to tell time, and they could all look different, but they're formed in such a way that they should be at the same level and asking the same type of
Okay,
answer.
so it just refers to a certain
A category.
part of the material
Yes.
that we want them to be learning, singled out for
Conjugating
purposes
verbs.
of measuring.
It's a way to categorize the material.
Okay.
And then the spiraling is the sequence that material occurs in instruction, and maybe how often that might occur. So,
For me, spiraling would be coming back to that unit.
Okay.
So
Coming back to the
if I'm
same
looking at
topic
this and I say,
repeatedly.
okay, these top 5, we're gonna have 5 minutes at the beginning of the day where I'm gonna tell the class, hey, these are some things we worked on. We're gonna come back to them, so.
Okay, I understand. And then the bottom line there, you said that appeared to be a field test.
It's almost guaranteed to be field test
What
questions.
what's a field test?
Okay, so the state throws into every test certain questions that aren't actually going to count for against the student. They want to test it and see
They're
what kind of.
testing the question. I get it. Okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
All right.
Because that looks like I would be really excited, and then when I realized only 6 kids saw it, and that's statistically useless, so. But I do let teachers see this. There was talk about stripping out the ones we assumed that was about, but I still think it's good to kind of see that, so at least they know what kinds of things are in there.
That just helps me understand what you've been doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Quick, further questions?
So can I just expand on, as I listen to Dr. Day, I'm feeling your frustration too. And it's common frustration amongst educators, particularly when states, and I'll say states because I've worked in another state has done the similar things. And it's almost like they back benchmark. So we'll give a test. We can't really tell you what those scores mean until after we get another year of those, then we can go back and tell you what those were. And it's just the patience of educators as we deal with that. So since this is their first year of really going through all of the assessments, we anticipate it as we're going to get numbers, right? Without as much meaning except for what Mr. Yarborough said in terms of comparing how groups did with those numbers. But I suspect that if they continue with consistency, this in 2 years is going to make much more sense because they would have baselined it to what those numbers actually mean. So it's not you, and it really, the frustration that we all feel, you just categorized it quite nicely for us.
Yeah, it sounds to me like they're collecting the data. Then students will take the SOLs, then they'll do regression or they'll fit models then that'll tell you how predictive this is and that if you score at a certain level, you have a high probability of passing that particular SOL test. But so they're collecting the
Okay, that
predictive
helps me
data.
understand a bit better what's going on.
And that's what we're getting at.
It's
So
very
now all we have to show is whether they did better on the second test than the first. And that's what we're hoping to see with our
And
students.
I'm hoping they give me that, and I can plug it right in. I'll have done all the other work. So if at some point the state magically, and sometimes we don't know until the memorandum comes out, right, Dr. Edwards? They're like, hey, by the way, here's what all these scores mean. I'm like, great, all I have to do is go in and put in new parameters, and then we'll know exactly. So my feeling was, if nothing else, we've put everything in this truck but the engine. We just need you to tell
Well,
us.
and you'll be able to run your own models once you get the SOL scores and can tie them to how students did on this to see, at least for our students, was it
Right.
predictive? Is it predictive for all groups? Is it, equally predictive for all groups? And we're a big enough school division that you should have enough degrees of freedom kind of, to do that basic, regression model is really all it is. So that can give you your first indication of where it'll go. But probably what the state will do to muck it up, they'll change the questions and tweak it so that you don't, like you said, last year's test tested on prior year knowledge, where this year's test does current year knowledge, and so they're always changing it, and so you don't really have a fixed, right,
Those subsequent years are not comparable.
exactly.
There's one more piece that I am going to build that isn't ready yet. Once we have the first set of SOL scores, I'm going to take this data and I'm going to strip out all the kids who passed and all the kids who scored below a certain point, because as you know, we can retest a certain percentage of those kids, and we will do the same kind of analysis just on those kids. Because this kind of data on the kids who did really, really well doesn't matter. For the kids for whom this was a really tough test, that won't matter either. But we'll have really finite by school, by grade level, maybe even by teacher to say, of the 24 questions or 36 questions your kids saw, these are the 6 they missed the most. And then that spiraling, that remediation becomes super focused. And that's typically where we see the biggest gains, because if we can get a kid 3 more questions over on the things they struggled with, it can be the difference between 390 and a 405 or a 395 and a 420.
Excellent.
But now that they give us at least this kind of speed with it, all the models are built. I just have to plug it in on the back end and then disseminate it.
Excellent.
So as you can see, Chuck is excited. So we, not only do we have strategic use of data, but strategic use of Chuck as well. And he is certainly a gift to our team and to our schools, so that they can make sense of this and use this information to drive strategy at the school level, at the classroom level, by cohort. And I think it moves us, I know that it moves us in the direction that we want to move toward, with using this information to really do something about what we can see. If we see our students aren't performing optimally, we can do something about that. We can identify who those students are. And Chuck just gave a really clear example about potentially retesting or identifying who those students, down to the student in the group. And that's how we intend to continue to use this data. And we hope as we continue to present this information that you'll see those bars and those charts continue to have an equal distribution, but also more growth.
And hopefully, we'll see the SOL scores displayed similarly, where we have that scatter plot.
Absolutely.
And by the groups or overall by grade level, so that we can hopefully show that, yes, the mean score shows a really wide gap, but when you look here, there's a lot of overlap, and that tells a different kind of story.
And we did that for every test area,
Yeah.
for every school. We can give you access to
Yeah.
those. We just, again, you would never have invited me back if I'd shown you everything.
No. But you're doing a great job, so well done. Thank you.
All right, well, this certainly, our actual board goals for the year, this fits this information and being able to tie the information together. Thank you, Mr. Coleman, and one day in advance, congratulations to you already as you continue to move forward. And Chuck, thank you for passionate response. Board, anything else on this? And we'll continue to ponder over this information. And it looks like that there's somebody boots on the ground looking at all of this information all the time and figuring out what's going to be best for kids. And Randy, to me, that it sounds really good, right? And the work is being done. That's going to really help us. All right, thank you all. Give them a hand, and I appreciate you. All right, I think you all have enough stamina to go on to 2, right?
What?
Everybody have enough stamina to move on to number 2?
Let's roll.
Yes.
All right, FY '24 operating budget. Dr. Edwards.
Okay, certainly. So we have been talking about our proposed operating budget. I will start with a caveat that we do not have final revenue from the state yet. So we, in this presentation tonight, will still use the original December 16th governor's budget with some caveats. Just know that the House and Senate budgets are also, there's a calc tool that has proposed some differences in those, and we'll hit a little bit of that, but just for information purposes, we're going to go over tonight our budget. Next slide. Okay. For the public, the board certainly knows this because you all have been working very hard. We've had several meetings starting in December with our public budget hearing, which was an input hearing for the public to tell us some things that we should be looking at. We will have another one on March 21st, which will be our final public budget hearing at the end of the session. But in between there, you can see many meetings, school board meetings, work sessions, finance committee meetings, meetings with the city manager, and we have a joint city school council meeting that will be on March 28th as we continue our budget conversation. Next slide. This is, again, for information purposes, if anyone is new and watching, just a little information about our schools and programs, how many schools, early learning center, as well as a virtual academy and some alternative programs and specialty programs as well. And then just a quick snapshot of what our workforce, both full and part-time, look like, from school-based to transportation, school nutrition, and then you'll see some other departments right there. It does not include our substitute employees nor our coaches. About 90% of our staff provide direct service to our students, which is a good thing. Next slide. Here's a little bit about our demographics, and this was taken from the fall 2022 school quality profile data, so people can follow where we're getting that data from. So you can see how many students we have in pre-K, how many K through 12th grade students, and our percentage of economically disadvantaged, and so on, just to give you a little idea of our demographics. Next slide. Always love this one, how we in Lynchburg City Schools compare to our community. And again, our demographics are from the school quality profile from fall 2022. And the demographics for the city we're taking off their website. And it's always interesting to note the differences, particularly in the black population, overall black population in the schools versus the overall black population in the city. white population and 2 or more races. You can see where our school makeup is quite different than our city makeup there. Next slide. All right. So while the biggest business we have is providing educational services, and you will often hear, particularly when we start talking about raises for SOQ funded positions, it's important to note that as an organization, and we are one of the biggest organizations in the city, we have multiple arms and lots of functions. Similar to a small Fortune 500 company or even a mini city, we have a registrar, we have clerks, we have parking services for our students and our staff, social services. We do collect bills and bill folks for various things. Right now, we're sitting with our wonderful governing body. We have maintenance and automotive services. Right now, there's work being done in our back parking lot by our own employees for maintenance. So there are a lot of things that we do as an educational institution that cross over into social services and similar to things that you might see in the city as well. Next slide. What we're about, of course, our mission statement, and you notice that and beyond is there and not in italics because we are definitely focusing on our children not only to graduation, but and beyond. And then our core values, which have not changed, but are very important today about integrity, respect, teamwork, and learning. And I think you just saw that when we did the previous presentation on test scores. We're all learning a lot about this new testing system, talking to one another with respect and monitoring each other in terms of our teamwork and also everything that we do here with integrity. And that's what we want for our students as well. Next slide. So these are my favorite 3 numbers, 7, 8, and 9, because there's not much that we do where we're not thinking about it from either 7 or 8 or 9. 7 being the number of hours our kids spend in school with us. That doesn't really include after school activities or before school activities. We're hoping our babies get 8 hours of sleep. We know for some kids that's not true, but that would be great. But in a 24-hour day, that still leaves 9 hours of family time and community time where our kids are still learning and they're still engaged. And that's just Monday through Friday and not summer. So this doesn't even include summer. But we as a school division look at all that time, and we try to encourage parents to make sure that they are affording students with comparable sleep time, as well as working with our community to make sure that there are things in our community that are engaging for our young people as well. Next slide. All right, let's get into the meat of the budget. So let me start off just with some major things that are affecting our schools and some things that are maybe some big budget implications. So I'm going to start with the big one, that is that multi-million-dollar mathematical error that we shared with the board with regard to the grocery tax. And while there are some proposed solutions for the current year, which was about $815,000 for us in the current year, as we plan the next year's budget, FY24, we're still looking at $2 million that we're not sure, is that going to be there or isn't that going to be there? And that's a pretty big chunk for us as we're planning our budget going forward, and I don't want anyone to forget about that. You'll see that again as we move forward in this presentation. Next slide. Other things impacting our budget, and not just ours and other school divisions across the Commonwealth, as you can see, is the teacher shortage. And I've posted one of the articles about some of the things that our governor is doing. And right next to that, just giving you a snapshot of what was current probably a week ago, our website where we are still looking for educators and also trying to get ahead and get new teachers for next school year for anticipated vacancies. We've had teacher interview days this coming Saturday. If you're listening, we're having an educator fair at Heritage High School at 9 o'clock. That's for teachers and other staff members. It's not just a teacher shortage, it's a worker shortage that we're looking at. But that also factors into some of the budgetary decisions that we made. And I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. So here's one of those decisions. raising the minimum salary for our classified employees. Currently, we are at, the minimum starting salary is $13.11 per hour. And in our current budget proposal, we want to raise that to $15 an hour and also account for compression. So that means someone who is currently making, $14.99 or $15.02, they would see that that raise sort of follow through, and we would account for that compression going forward. It's important to know who our classified employees are. We use that term, but I've listed up there who are some of the folks that are in that area, including bus drivers, bus aides, instructional assistants, our custodians, our secretarial staff, which you may see as administrative assistants as we move forward to switching terminology there, school nutrition workers, and the very maintenance workers who are fixing our back parking lot are in that area. Next slide. So why come work for us at Lynchburg City Schools? This is when I'm trying to get classified employees. So I went on the city website to see what are some of the positions that the city is also advertising, because we do know that there is a worker shortage, and almost every organization is looking for someone. And there are some things that might be of interest, although I'm not encouraging any of my current workers to look into this. But it's important for us to know that as you look at the relief youth worker who works possibly in a detention center or the group home, the skill set for that may be similar to some of our instructional assistants, particularly those that are skilled with working with special needs populations. And that's already at $16.80 per hour, and our starting salary is at $13.11. Your utility line technician, which works with the water resources, that's a $20 an hour advertisement for a city worker. And again, we have our maintenance and custodial staff, but particularly in our facilities department, we have people who spent their entire winter break fixing plumbing and making sure that our buildings were open, and that could have been really bad for us, but we were able to get like Dunbar and Paul Monroe right open. Those are the same people who have skill sets. They also have licenses that would maybe see this as attractive. Administrative service assistant, similar to our administrative assistant, secretarial staff, that is being advertised at $15.65 starting. And then, of course, a sanitation operator, which would be someone who would, needs a CDL to drive the garbage truck, and we all want to make sure our city is clean, and we have excellent people that do that. But we also have folks who have CDLs and transport children who don't have that as their hourly rate. And I'm just pointing this out that this is our competition, really close to where workers living in Lynchburg may consider for jobs. So we need to be mindful of that as we look at our goals to increase that classified staff moving forward. Next slide. Often we'll hear us talk about bus drivers and a significant bus driver shortage almost everywhere that, I've talked to superintendents, not only in Virginia, but other states. But it's important for us to also look at the efforts that this board has taken over the last 6 years to sort of address some of the concerns that we have as we continue to move that starting salary up for our bus drivers. You can see in 18-19, it was $10.86, and now it is up to $14.27, and we're proposing with our 1550 plan that it would go, starting salary would go up to $16.14 an hour. So while it is, I would say none of this is the absolute wonderful 100% best, it is steps in the right direction that this board has continually taken over the last couple years to improve and increase salaries for our employees. Next slide. So let's talk about what we want to do for teachers. And since it is a CTE Appreciation Month as well, I chose to put some of our skilled CTE teachers in this diagram along with our students, many of whom who did a wonderful job of feeding us at the legislative breakfast. Our our Mr. Dooley got his hair cut by our students in the cosmetology program as well, but you can see a wealth of skills here. These are tradespeople. They have licenses. They have skills, just like their counterparts outside of LCS. So another reason why we want to raise the minimum salary for our teaching staff, our educators, from $43,469 to $50, and again, account for compression. There is so much that they do, and you saw me talk about a mini institution. In addition to teaching the content, developing relationships, social skills, addressing both nutritional and social emotional health issues as well. Next slide. So how do we look against other nearby folks? And this is current year, so not next year, but currently you can see we are at the top, and that is not as clear as my diagram, but we put Lynchburg City in yellow, and then we put Amherst, Appomattox, Campbell, Nelson, Danville City, Harrisonburg City, and Roanoke City in green. Those are all either neighbors or comparable cities that their current starting salary for first-year teachers is higher than ours. And then in Bedford and Roanoke County right now is slightly lower than we are. So in terms of competitive, remember I talked about where our maintenance workers, where our administrative assistants, our bus drivers, what are some options for them? If you look at this, you can see our teachers also have some options as well. And we really saw that this year, particularly in hard-to-fill areas like math and science moving forward. As we account for inflation, and everybody's trying to get the salaries up, this is only going to continue. And even if everybody does a 5% increase to meet that second half of the governor's budget from last year, that still keeps us behind. So we have to do better if we want to be better to catch up. Next slide. And then lastly, as part of our 1550 plan, is we looked at the admin employees. And again, I've listed a list of who's on the admin or who is included in the admin employee. You can see to the left there are several school-based positions, your speech pathologist, OTPT, your BCBA, as well as your building principals and your APs, and then, of course, some central office folks, which are listed on the right side. And what we wanted to do is look at those salaries and, of course, re-benchmark them against base salaries from our neighboring counties, similar to what we did with teachers this past year. We also had 16 pay schedules, and if you recall, with the classified staff last year, I think we had 24, and one of our missions was to collapse them, so we want to collapse these to 8 pay schedules. And then in order to really look at 1550, that $15 an hour and $50,000 in a very methodical way, at the admin level, we were recommending a flat dollar increase for admin employees, which you will see in the individual pay tables when you go through them. Next slide. So this is always my favorite because folks say, well, you're getting money for the raises from the state, right? So why is this an issue? So currently for FY24 in the governor's budget, you can see there's about $3.4 million in compensation supplement for the SOQ funded positions. And in order for us to take that, we are required to match that at $2.0 million. That's just for the SOQ funded positions. If we want to be equitable and also share those increases with the other employees, we're going to have to add to that from our operating budget. So it's not as simple as hearing that the state is providing a 5% raise, really looking at the numbers and breaking down what does that mean for us. Next slide. Okay. And then there are some things that just go up, right? We hope they don't, but they do go up, and that's cost and legal services. Finance committee met and did an in-depth dive into health insurance, which we know those costs are going up. When you look at utilities and, for us, contracted services for transportation. And I put some headlines just so that this is not just a Lynchburg City Schools thing. If you noticed, and I noticed it in my own home, my electric bill looked a little higher than it has been in the past. So you can imagine what the electric bills on our schools also look like. So even though we're budgeting for them, we have to consider those increases as well. And with our bus driver shortage, one of the things that we still have to do is we still have to get the kids to and from school. So whether that's our Lynchburg City Schools bus drivers, or we pay contracted services to hire outside companies to transport some of our students for some of our routes, some of our special needs routes, we still have to do that. And what we're seeing is an increase in contracted services, and I suspect it's because they too have bus driver shortages and want to pay their employees more. Next slide. So what are we doing to kind of help out with some of this cost savings in addition to looking at revenue? One of the things that we look at, and if you look at this chart, you'll see personnel, personnel, personnel. The biggest part of our budget is people. We are a people institution, and probably over 80% of our budget is for the people who serve the children. But one of the strategies that we do is we repurpose a position based on need. So I'll give you a live example as I look at Dr. Wodeka. When Mr. Gatsky retired, what we did was repurpose that position. We didn't refill it. We repurposed it to get a deputy superintendent so that we could have someone over all of the operations. So that's one way that we look at what is our true need, how can we meet our need, and how can we kick in to help ourselves with some of those services. The other is to look at a position and maybe we eliminate it. Sometimes that happens due to attrition. So we don't need as many of, or if we had a position that is no longer needed, we might just eliminate that position totally. I've talked about this particularly in the beginning of school when we're enrolling students and families. This is going to become more and more important as we go forward. The quicker you can enroll, do registration, and secure your spot, the better it is, because what we ended up doing, these next two strategies are either collapsing classes based on class size. So if I have a building that has maybe 4 of a certain grade level teacher and enrollment looks like I only need 3, I will collapse it for 3 and I could repurpose that 4th FTE teacher to someplace else. Now, if we wait to the last minute to enroll our students to the first day of school, that makes it a little problematic to really predict that. So we do encourage families to enroll early and provide that information. The other thing that we do is we use class size reduction funds. So particularly at the elementary levels, K-3, certain class sizes are like either 19 or 20 or 22 or 23. And when we start to approach that, come close 1 to 2 students, we cap those class sizes. So some of our families who joined us in November and December who are legally where they live may go to school X, but that grade level is already full. We've called those families, we've worked with transportation, we've worked with the families to say, there's another second grade class at these other 3 schools that we would work with you to go to because we're trying to honor that class size. Old strategies predate BC, before Crystal, were just get another teacher for that school. And we've really tried to be mindful of not doing that and moving kids where we can. And families have been wonderful in cooperating with us. And then, of course, as we have more tech tools that help us with efficiency and productivity, again, we may need less people to do the job with the help of some technology tools. One of the tools that we have that we're real grateful for is board docs. And those of you who've been on the board for a while may remember when we used to have big binders of paper, there was a whole bunch of folks who took time photocopying, putting color paper together and delivering them to your homes, right? So, Madam Clerk, we don't have to do that anymore, and we don't have to enlist some extra support because we used to take some folks offline during the day to help do that work. And those things are happening all the time. In terms of services, I cannot stress enough that, and you all know this, routine maintenance is better than major repair, right? So to the degree that we can take a small problem and fix it, while it's still a small problem and not let it escalate to a real big problem, we are doing that work. And I'm grateful, again, looking at Dr. Wodeka and the facilities team that does a lot of that. And then, of course, always evaluating contracted services for better pricing. Who can we get better price from? And Ms. Capazzi is always on top of that in terms of trying to help us with that. And then looking at how we use our resources and making reductions when we can. We are all in the budget area right now and looking for areas where can we reduce materials and supplies. Now, remember, that's a small portion of our budget, but if it helps us in another way, we're definitely doing that. So we usually don't talk so much about what we're doing internally that you all don't see necessarily that we're doing, but that work goes on as we're building budgets at the school level and at the department level, which will result in what you see going forward. Next slide. So that brings us to this, which is really just a photo of an item which you can get off a board doc, so it's real clear, because I don't expect anybody to be able to read that document there, but you do have a that document in board docs. So for the public that's listening, if you want to see a copy of the one-pager, which I'm going to shift to in a second, you can get that off of board docs. Next slide. Here you go. So before I shift, I want to pause and take any questions, and then what we'll do is dive into that Excel spreadsheet with those 4 different scenarios.
All right, before the dive, questions, please? Anyone? All right, Dr. Edwards, looks like the board wants you to continue.
Man, I was hoping to get more work, but okay. All right, moving on. Okay, so let's take that one pager, which is that Excel spreadsheet. Again, this is based on the governor's budget and revenue. So I'm just going to kind of go over it a little bit with the board. Excuse me, we went over it in Finance Committee, but for the board and for the public who are looking, if you go down and just go across the spreadsheet, you'll see that everything is numbered. That makes it easier to reference. There are categories for the types of things that we are recommending. These are things that are over and above any transfers and reallocations that we've already done. So if we've already repurposed a position, you won't see it here. These are things that we think we're going to have to ask for that are above and beyond. Who's requesting it? Either myself, my office, or different departments or a school. And then, of course, how is everything aligned to our strategic plan? That's really, really important that we align all of our budgetary decisions to that. A quick description, the estimated costs, and when you get down to the math teacher and the English teacher, the cost for a teacher goes beyond just salary, it's benefits as well. So you'll see that. I don't want anyone to say the salary for a first-year math teacher is 81. That's including benefits as well as the guesstimation. Some priorities, and then, of course, some notes to make it clear about what we're requesting. So you can see up until line 6, that's all the 1550 plan broken down for you for classified and teaching staff and admin staff. Then you'll see some things in there, and I want to point out line 7 because I think that's going to be a topic of discussion. Line 7 is health insurance, and then it's $700,000, which would be an additional, it should say employer, and it says employee, so I have to fix that, employer contribution to the health insurance. This is questionable. So if you go down to the left side of the spreadsheet, the bottom, you'll see something that says health insurance history. And last year, this board in FY23 increased the employer contribution by 10%, $815,000. In the previous year, FY22, you added $525,000 to that for a total of 1.3. Those are things that you consciously made decisions of in the previous 2 years, and we did not make any changes in health insurance to the employees. So in other words, the board absorbed the costs of the increases. Line 7 above is if you want to continue that trend and that practice, we're looking at possibly $700,000 if that's where the board wants to continue. So I'm budgeting for it because we need to have a conversation about health insurance and health insurance options. So that's what that is in that line. Line 8 and 9 are the transportation costs. You'll see there's an increased cost for fuel, and we're hoping that as the electric buses come online later in the school year, but I don't think we're starting the school year with electric buses in the fall, so we have to budget for fuel. You'll see the contracted services for additional transportation, and then some benefits, some perks from the HR department, that anything that we can do to just make it a little bit easier for our employees. We brought those back by popular demand. They were on the budget last year. And then as much as we tried to repurpose and for teachers and really think critically how we can meet teaching staff, there were these 3 positions at Lincoln Middle School that we absolutely think we need going forward next year. So unlike previous years where this spreadsheet was maybe like 3 or 4 pages long, you got half a page of requests because we really try to do due diligence. Also down on the left in blue, you'll see that our current, what we always say is level funding, is about $40.7 million. That's where we are in the current year for level. Underneath that, you'll see, again, there's that compensation supplement. That's revenue that we anticipate we're going to get from the state. There's some additional basic aid that we intend to get from last year to this year. So that's $1.1 million. We also added the algebra readiness that will help us with the additional math teacher. That algebra readiness is based on 7th and 8th grade SOL scores and need. And then some internal reductions of about $467,000, which gives us an adjustment of about $5.2 million that would contribute to our overall budget goals. Also, because I don't want anyone to get amnesia, I put that grocery tax in there. There's that $2 million that we might be missing for grocery. So what does that mean? That gives us about 4 different scenarios on where we're standing just using the governor's budget. Scenario A is probably the most expensive, and that is the one that says, suppose we don't get that $2 million for the grocery tax, hold harmless. So that's taken from our budget. And if the board wants to continue its previous practice of adding extra money on the employer side to health care. So that's adding $700,000. In order to meet our goals, which are about $12 million worth of goals, if we did everything above, that makes our city council ask about $9.2 million, and that brings our budget request up to $49.9. All right, so that's scenario A. It just goes down from there. So I always like to start with what's the biggest impact. Scenario B, right underneath it, is essentially the same, except we actually do get that $2 million revenue from the grocery tax. So if you look at scenario B, it's still saying the board is going to contribute $700,000, but it also says somehow we've worked it out that we get the grocery tax for next year. That would make our ask about $7.1 million and bring our city council funding request to $47.9. All right. Scenario C and D is something that the board needs to decide. That's with no increase on the employer side, at least from this method, for the health insurance. Ms. Capazzi and the Finance Committee talked about ways that we can fully fund health insurance for a couple different ways. So if you look at those 2 scenarios, it really would require that we look at that health insurance a little closely and examine some of the things that Finance, I'm sure, is going to share. But the first one, again, is if we don't get the grocery tax, then that makes our ask at about $8.5 million, which is our 49.2 would bring our new budget. And then scenario D is probably the best case scenario of the 4, is if we do get the grocery tax. And again, I have to keep stressing this is just based off the governor's revenue. If we have the Senate revenue, things look a little brighter, as you can see from some of that's proposed. So that is where we are sitting right now. Wanted to really go over that in detail more for folks who are listening and also watching, because the board has seen some of this. And now I'll take a quick pause again and take some questions before we move to.
All right, a lot of work going on in this. Dr. Day.
Whether or not we get the grocery tax, is not up to us. Right. So we're really choosing between A or B, depending on how the grocery tax works out, or C or D, depending on how the grocery tax works out. There's really, among the options you've got here, there's really only a two-way choice for us.
Correct.
Thank you, Dr. Day. Dr. Carter?
Again, when we were at the Capitol Conference, Senator Newman was pretty sure that they're going to find a way to help us regain those, not just us, but the school systems regain that. And I know I've seen a lot of conversation regarding how that's impacting the budgets. And while I'm talking, and I know it's just crazy of me to think this way, but I'm not in favor of adding to the employees for the health insurance. They have stood by and they've worked with us and they've done extra shifts and double shifts and covered everything. And now when we're trying to give them a raise, then we're gonna also, at the same time, make them pay more. Now, but our plans are wonderful. I haven't seen any around that is that good, and the costs are really great. And I would like to keep it like that because I think that's a benefit in our favor.
That's one of the things that we tell our story that's a very positive selling point. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Anyone else? Keep in mind the Finance Committee has looked at this, and we're going to hear more in the next meeting, et cetera. All right, Dr. Edwards. Well, I'm sorry, Dr. Brennan, go right ahead. And Dr.
I
Day
had another
here.
question. Yeah,
Please, you can go right back.
You don't, no? I was just gonna clarify, your item 8 about the transportation costs, which is the fuel, cost. Did you try to think about electric costs once we're running the electric buses? So did you try to include that in some way when you were assessing possible fuel expense
Yeah,
increases?
Dr. Wartica has a very complicated formula that he used and accounted for everything, but I'll let him speak to that.
Sure. So, so the first thing we did on that was to take a look at the history on the fuel costs, just back to the diesel and gasoline that we buy. When we originally were doing the projections in October for the next year, that's when fuel prices were really high. We were paying almost $5 a gallon for diesel. That's come down quite a bit since then, and so we readjusted those numbers. So when we look at, so there will be an increase in electric costs, but when we look at the sort of mile per gallon equivalent of what it costs to run an electric school bus, it's pennies on the dollar of what it costs to run a diesel engine. So we do have some increase there, but not, I don't have really a very good calculation of what it could be. So we just kind of did some assumptions on that.
So there's a little bit of the electric costs in that 700,000, but it's mostly petroleum costs?
Yeah, so what, well, it would be $200,000.
Oh, 200, yeah, I'm sorry, I pointed at the
So
wrong line, yeah.
What we sort of did was that we said, so a third of our fleet will be electric halfway through the year. So if you just divide that by 2, that's 17%, right? So that would be reduced. And I think we used a reduction factor of like maybe 8%. So I guess kind of we did account for that. So without better data, we're just going blind, but that's kind of where we are.
So I think the short answer to my question is yes,
Yes.
we did try to include electric costs in that
Yes, sir.
200,000 estimate. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say that I think that this proposal of the 1550 is an excellent idea, and we've talked so much about supporting our staff. We talked about the loss of teachers nationally, statewide, and what we need to do to help to retain them in a lot of ways. I think salary is clearly one of them. I think that my other suggestion is that what we've been given here are a list of a variety of things, but the salary being at the top of the list, and some other things that are added on here, and some other expenses that I think we need to be sort of laser focused on what we really want. I mean, I think we all know there's gonna be an uphill battle with city council to make this work, but I think if our goal is to get to $15 and $50,000, we zero in on that, we have the best chance of it. So 2 comments that I'd like to bring to the board administration. Number 1 is that, we talk about our health our health reserve fund that we have, which is like $2 million or something. And we had contributed that several years ago because we had excess funds. It was a good year, and we put, I think, $600,000 into that several years ago. You know, I think as we look at this budget and trying to figure out what things can we actually say, maybe we need to do something on our own as compared to asking for city council, we should continue taking that $700,000 from our healthcare reserve, which is sitting there, and we funded that before, rather than go to city council, because our real emphasis is we want the 1550. And then the other thing, because I agree with Dr. Carter, that we do want health insurance for our employees. It is an important benefit, and we don't want to increase what they're paying for it. But whether we should go to the city and ask for that, or whether we should use a reserve that really is, my understanding is there for us to try to tap into, and we're treating it like we don't ever want to do it, but maybe this is a point where we may want to consider doing it. And then the last piece is the ones towards the bottom, which are like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 on our list, are things that new board members may not realize were on our list last year that we weren't able to do. And they are nice things that we want to do for the staff. We tried to do it last year, and it didn't make the final cut. I wonder whether we still want to emphasize those again this year. Do we really want to emphasize $15 minimum salary, $50,000 salary for our employees, and emphasize that aspect of it? So I think if the conversation is trying to narrow us down into what do we want to actually do with these numbers as far as revenue and expenses, I would just I would mention that to the board and administration just for consideration.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brennan. Dr. Dave, would your hand back up?
Yes, I would. I just wanted to make another point about the concern that Sharon expressed about, you know, being reluctant to add an increase of insurance premium to employees when they kind of, you know, eats away at the salary or wages increase. But Karen did produce a little one-page spreadsheet where she tried to estimate the net effect for, I think it was for someone on the family plan. You know, how does the balance work out with the 1550 increase in their earnings minus the increase in insurance premiums, and it still works out to a net salary increase of almost 7.8%. So even if we did go with increasing premiums, the typical employee is still going to see a significant earnings increase.
Yeah, and just for full transparency, the premiums will go up for employees to bring us in line with what our anticipated expenditures are, and it's in proportion to what those expenditures have been traditionally. And then our part of it is going up by $700,000. But we examined it, and for the lowest earning full-time employee with one of the higher cost options, family option, it would not take their entire raise. It would still leave them with about a 7% increase. So they'll still have more take-home pay, and we're more even with bringing in as much as we're spending on the health side.
Dr. Carter?
So have we voted on that? That's,
No,
We just looked at it in finance committee.
All of this
and
is-
It's very equitable. It's a reasonable ask. We haven't raised premiums in like 5 or 6 years. And given the rate at which health expenses increase, I think it's to be expected. You know, it's not sustainable to not raise it.
so where's that document?
We all got it in
Finance Committee.
Yeah.
It's on board doc.
Just to clarify, that's not a decision made by the board.
No.
No.
I think you kind of suggested we are going to raise premiums for employees.
Yes.
We're gonna
Yeah, and honestly, to be fair, I don't know how we can not do that. Unless we take it out of operating budget, because we've been collecting less than we're spending in terms of claims. Is that correct what I'm saying? And so we're trying to bring what people are paying in line with what is going out.
All
Do
right.
we know the percentages for the employer and the percentages for the employee? The increase?
Yeah, that kind of information is all in the information that Karen put together.
She's checking to see if it's on board docs.
Yeah, it should be on board docs on the finance.
For the finance committee meeting last
That little
week.
one pager is not, but I'll send it to Tina.
So any documents that you need, that can get funneled to you. Again, in the work session, the purpose is that we get several looks at this, and we're trying to get understanding, and we have a process, and ultimately, we will vote, but we're not at that point at this time. Dr. Day?
I just had one further comment, because Dr. Brennan raised the issue of maybe we could use the health insurance reserve to cover the excess between the health insurance expenditures and the revenue that comes in for premiums. And I just want to make the obvious point that we can't do that every year. That's a one-time fix, and then it leaves the health insurance reserve depleted. So that's not, we may choose to do that. I'm not arguing for or against it. I'm just pointing it out, that that's a one-time option.
Thank you, Dr. Day. Dr. Brennan?
And I totally agree with Dr. Day, that's exactly right. I keep hoping that there's gonna be some changes in our plan, because I think we talked about reviewing our plan so that we actually improve it, so we don't have to have these deficits every year. I think that's what Dr. Sinha is talking about, that there are various options on the table being looked at. So I totally agree with that.
All right, any further questions on this item? Of course, sustainability will be key. Dr. Gupta, I know you've got a lot to say. You might want to say it tonight. Were you wanting to say something?
I said it in the finance committee.
Sure.
To me, the employee premium goes up from $40 to $45. I know it's a $5 increase, but it's an increase. And so you give it from one hand and then take it away from the other hand. So we discussed, argued back and forth with no result. Could we keep that? And it brings in about $40,000 net gross.
And he's talking about the employees who are on the single plan, who have the lowest
Oh, I
premium.
know
So
that.
theirs would, under the option we're considering recommending, so we'll give you all the options, but under the one that we're considering, it would raise their monthly or per paycheck? Monthly by $5 a month.
What about the family and the, what's the next one? The single, one spouse and one or something?
Yeah.
Employee child?
We'll have that up on board docs to look at, because it's, until we vote on it, it's not final, but it's certainly all laid out there.
All right, any more questions for Dr. Edwards or anything concerning the budget for 2024? Mr. Trost?
Okay, and on scenario D, of course, it doesn't have the $2 million mathematical error money in there, but I'm hopeful on that. It does have the premium going up to account for the $700,000 shortfall, correct?
No, on D?
On D?
No, we're not asking for that.
Well, right now, we're
We would.
we're
fully-
passing it on to the employee.
Well, let me just back up a little bit. So when it came to so we're looking at, I think it's $14 million worth of projected costs. So, in some of the proposals that Ms. Capazzi presented, it's a shared cost. So as the premium goes up, the premium for the employer also, our share also goes up, as well as the employee share. We pay the bigger share of the premium, but both would go up. So it's not just fully passing all of the cost on to the employee. And then they looked at different options of how to do that.
I mean, I'm looking at scenario D, and it looks like to meet the 1550, now we can somehow, our ask is 6.5 million. So it's starting to, I mean, it's getting in within reach.
These were, and you're absolutely right, they were tough conversations that we had to have in terms of where are we putting our requests for? And this sheet has it all on there. Obviously, I have to show you everything. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have a discussion about cost sharing for health insurance. And there hasn't been an increase in the premiums in quite some time. And we also looked at what the city does, just to kind of get a comparison as to how our counterparts across the street, what is their contribution to it. So those documents Ms. Capazzi shared, and they should be on board docs from the Finance Committee. But ultimately, this group will have to get together and say whether or not you want to keep that, I call it the cushion, the $700,000 cushion in there, or let's remove the cushion but examine options for how we better cost share and meet those needs for our health.
Thank you. Dr. Gupta?
You go ahead. She got it.
No, Dr. Gupta, you go ahead, please, and then
So,
Dr.
a
Carter.
couple of other things in the Finance Committee. I'm against adding 2 positions at the bottom because our focus should be salaries. It will distract the whole discussion in terms of when we start arguing across the street. Number 2, as I brought up before, we carry weight for a lot of ancillary units, Gov School, STEM Academy. And in this current proposed budget, once the numbers are visible, you'll see it'll be adding a burden of the burden will be $388,000, 384 or 388? What's the correct number? It's 384, $384,000 LCS is contributing for these ancillary units. So where is the equitable weight sharing by the school districts? So if you're Appomattox and Campbell, Amherst, Bedford, you send students to these places, they are not sharing their fair share.
Right.
And it brought up before this board 4 years ago.
Yes, sir.
4 years ago, and it was put to the side that it's too hard to touch. But the cost at that time, if I remember, was $144,000. It's now $384. So we are basically raising premium for our employees by $5, and it's not a big deal for some people, which is $40,000, right? But if you keep that premium same and you try to let people pay their fair share, then you can make up for that gap. You see what I'm saying? $384 and $40,000 for increasing premium by $5. You charge me up now, so.
I got you. I'm glad I have. Very good. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Dr. Carter?
Well, I always say no to putting in more burden or just increasing the employees, because we've always been able to find the money. And we've always been able to cover the loss or the difference each month.
I think one of the ways that we are covering the loss, although you see it as a negative in the budget, just because that's the total, the net, is on the backs of unfilled positions.
Right.
Not a guarantee, right? The goal, 1550, is to do what? Fill the positions. If we fill the positions, we also would be funding health insurance for those folks, which means we wouldn't have that extra money to do those things, to fund it or find it. That has gotten us through, but it's not sustainable.
And I don't think it's good practice, you know, to depend on that as a way to supplement our healthcare costs. And the truth is, our expenditures have exceeded projections, and we're just trying to be in line with the projection. And it's possible we could have a good year and then we fall under the projection. But if we really wanted to be prudent, we would either fund it through general operating fund and/or added cost to the premiums 5 or 10% above what's projected expense, because we know that the last several years we've exceeded projections in terms of what those claims would be. We're just trying to be even with what the projected is.
So did the healthcare costs go up
Yes.
the same amount as it did last year? Generally, there's an average that the insurance.
Yeah, we're
Versus
trying to
things that
get
always
that
goes up.
trend year to year to look at, to see what that trajectory has been and what the gap has been in terms of what we're paying in, what our employees are paying in, and what that difference is.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Preston?
What is the process for increasing the financial contribution of the other school systems, number one? And would it make a significant impact if there was an increase?
Each of those groups have their own board, so it would have to work its way through a process in which we probably would initiate, I guess, that they would consider that.
So,
Is that correct, Dr. Edwards?
Yeah, so similar to the way that CVCC let us know that their prices were going, their tuition was going up, we would communicate with those other entities, STEM Academy, Gov School, so on, that health insurance would be going up. Here is the increase in the employer cost that we are no longer going to fund. Now, they'd have to take that back to their board, and they'll be sitting doing exactly what we're doing. Where do we find the additional money? And because they're tuition-based, one of the easier solutions is to just raise tuition to cover whatever costs that they have, which is a possible solution, which would come back to us for the students that we pay tuition for going. So we may see some change in that, but as Dr. Coleman said, each one of them has a board that they would make those.
so bottom line there is that's a process that would take some time, so I definitely think it's something we need to explore and engage with these entities because it's unsustainable. But it's not gonna help us for this round of budget negotiations.
work this out, yeah.
But it sounds like it's something that would be feasible to do in the process for next year, so that we've got plenty of time to work out all
Correct.
those arrangements and the amounts and all that kind of good stuff.
Yes.
Then maybe we won't be back in this position.
And so being proactive and getting on that.
We're at least recouping half of what we're under in terms of where that gap is.
Yeah, so let's make sure that we begin. Madam Clerk, please so note that there probably needs to be some communication with our board members on those boards in that regard. Dr. Carter?
And it wouldn't be that complicated to do this year. A lot of the boards are still doing their budgets.
That's true.
And haven't finalized it, but what you will get is blank stares, and then they move on. No one wants to, it's just been a way that they haven't they haven't had to do it, so why do it now? But we do need to look at that. And not only that, but there was also another question regarding not just the input, but some other cost that we were assuming full responsibility for.
The retirees?
No, that's another issue, but for the healthcare. The claims, yes, the claims. And what is it about the claims?
That's where we were last time when we were
Yes.
having this discussion,
Right.
that if their claims were high, that we would have to pay their claims as well, that we were, and that got to be interesting to try to determine when you're looking at some of these entities only have 1 or 2 employees.
But the claims were pretty significant.
So the key to this that Dr. Gupta stepped out a little bit, and we've actually been diving into that, Dr. Gupta, your thoughts about the responsibilities we incur from other boards, is that our board members, finance hash it out, there may be a window of time, our board members making statements on those individual boards, and it boils down to the work that you're already doing, advocacy about those matters. And I think that whether it be this year or next year, that needle can be moved. And so, Madam Chair of the Finance Committee, thank you for your competence in helping us with some of these questions that have come forward, and each member on the committee and others. We'll keep talking about this. We can see we're working on efficiencies and all of those things, because it's going to be interesting once we get to that place of making decisions. Just before we move on, Dr. Edwards, we'll get a few more looks at this, right?
Yes, and we kind of need a direction to go because, we are at, February 21st, and we do have to submit information to City Council as to what we are proposing. So typically, I would give them a number in January, late January, early February, as to this is what we think. Now, that changes sometimes depending upon revenues, but also discussion. So I think really what with these 4 scenarios, and as Dr. Day pointed out, the $2 million is kind of out of our hands. So we can either just say, we're going to assume that's going to be solved and move forward with that, but the $700,000 and whether or not we pursue alternate methods to not have to do 700,000. So that could be take it from the reserve, that could be pass on the costs, it could be a combination of things. I would need to know that from this board as to where you're sitting, so that we can prepare something to send over to city council.
Dr. Gupta?
What, I'm gonna put you on spot. Based on your professional judgment, which is the best scenario?
That's a tough spot to put me on. And I am not in favor of increasing costs to employees. However, I do recognize that as health insurance has continued to increase, at least during my tenure, we've done due diligence to try not to pass that cost on. But I don't know how much longer we can hold that back. So to the degree that we finagle the impact of that, which I think is what finance was doing, looking at multiple options to say, how would it impact this group, this group, this group? I thought that was a worthwhile conversation that we have, but I think that we need to move in that direction.
So will that be scenario C, D?
Yeah, I'm in the CD side of it, we're really on the D side of it, hoping that the revenue will be, grocery tax we won't suffer that, which would put our ask at about 6.4.
I think that's.
Dr. Day?
Would it be helpful to take, I don't know what you call it, kind of a straw poll to see where the sentiments of the board are now? A non-binding, we're not voting on
Somewhat
anything, but if
directions.
people have an opinion about including the 700,000 to cover the discrepancy between input and output, or adding, the premiums up, would it be helpful to have a statement of sentiment?
Yes, and let me just remind the board too that on March 21st, I think that's our work session, you're actually going to adopt a budget. So this is a preliminary conversation so that we can get the conversation started across the street with city. But you do have multiple times to kind of look at it and retool it, refine it before you adopt it on March 21st, and then we start the joint city meeting. So there are alternate times, but to your point, yes, that would be helpful.
Okay. All right, now, we're gonna have to wind this down at some point. I don't know if, Dr. Edwards, if I'm at my best tonight to make a decision, even though I see Dr. Day saying somewhat of a direction-setting, straw pollish type of thing. I can see that. I see Dr. Gupta, Dr. Brennan wants to comment, and then I'm gonna try to move us towards coming to conclusion on this matter.
Mine?
Yes.
I think not everybody was at the finance committee, so they may not have all the information right now. I like the idea of straw poll, but right now, it puts somebody at disadvantage.
They haven't had a chance to
They don't
read it,
have the
yeah.
whole information, so, let's put that on board docs, all the handouts on there, and then,
Yeah, we could present those scenarios at our next business meeting, or,
Dr. Edwards, do you need that in
Or-
terms of
Do
time
you need that
sensitivity?
now?
Do you need it before then?
I need it for tomorrow.
oh, okay.
All right, let me hear from Dr. Brennan.
I just want to say, I was going to say the same thing Dr. Gupta says. I've been very uncomfortable with this conversation about the health insurance plan. I mean, we talked about this for a long time, and all of a sudden, this is brought to the board without really having the data to look at it. I have a lot of trouble voting for a plan that gets rid of the cost that we have for health insurance without knowing how we're going to do that. And I do feel uncomfortable. I think there are various, as we said before, there are various aspects of the plans we should look at to see if there are ways to do this other than to increase the premium. And so I feel uncomfortable doing a straw vote for the same reason Dr. Gupta says. I don't have the data about this health insurance, making that $700,000 go away. Just that route makes me uncomfortable with having seen that and understanding what we're doing with the health insurance plan. And I feel it's unfortunate for the employees that we're bringing this up without the board really having the information to be able to deal with it more directly.
That's not helping you.
It kind of does. I mean, I'm hearing Dr. Brennan say he's uncomfortable, which for me says let's err on the side of keeping 700,000 for tomorrow's sake. He may change his mind on March 21st and say, we figured out a way. But for right now, at least it helps me, kind of guides me on what to send across the street. So
So don't eliminate the 700K, go with scenario A or B.
I could do that, yeah.
So may I just then express my own personal opinion?
You
given
certainly
my
may.
understanding at this point.
You certainly may.
My preference would be C or D. I understand the desire to not increase the premiums to our employees, but we can't shield them from reality either. Health costs are going up. The point of insurance is to share the costs around, and that's all that we're trying to do, is take the cumulative costs to our employees and spread them around so nobody bears, the whole community bears the expense of everyone's health care. And if health care costs are going up, then everyone's share of that is going to go up. And it may be unpleasant, but I don't think we should shield the employees from that reality. Everyone else in the working world faces the same thing. If you're, insured by Anthem, every so often the rates go up. That's just the way it is. So I understand the sentiment behind favoring scenario A or B, but I don't think that's the right way to go. I think in honesty and just facing reality, we should go with C or D.
Okay, same people again. Dr. Brennan, then Dr. Gupta. Okay.
So I think that this board is very aware of the complexity of health insurance plan and this health insurance plan. And I think, this entity, Lynchburg City Schools, is a self-insured plan. So we're not Anthem, we're not Blue Cross Blue Shield, we're not people that have a buffer somewhere. I mean, what we spend, we have to account for. And I think we can do better with what our costs are if we understand what those costs are. And we really don't know what our costs are. We're really not doing the best job we can as a self-insured corporation understanding that. So just to say we're going to try to match our costs going up without saying what are those costs? Are they drugs? Are they hospitalizations? What are they? So we can have some impact on it is really important. And that's what health insurance companies will do, or companies will do who are self-insured. So for us to just say we're going to start matching this with a number that we don't really know where it came from, I think is not being good fiduciary body to look at what our costs should be. I mean, we have a health insurance plan that's self-insured. We should have information about where are our costs, why are they going up, what can we do across the board to do it, rather than just say, we see our costs going up, we're going to ask the employees to pay for that. I don't think that's the appropriate role, and I think we've said this for a long time. We need a review of the plan to really look at it.
All right, and we remind each board member, we're not voting tonight at all. So everybody's sentiment on that is being heard there. We're not voting on any of this. We're simply trying to give some guidance, because if we're looking for efficiencies, we don't want rapid trails running around kind of stuff. Dr. Gupta.
Several other realities. The reality is inflation is almost 7 to 9%. The reality is we are almost the lowest average or median salaried school district around us, where they are not putting their fair share contribution to Lynchburg City Schools. They just give us a cap that you are the fiduciary in charge of it, and then they take $400,000 from our budget. And the other reality is the benefits do attract employees. I was at Lincoln Elementary School 2 weeks ago, and Dr. G mentioned that she's having difficulty hiring special ed teacher, and one teacher was looking at different districts, the salary was higher, and she did her calculations, and the benefits at LCS were wonderful, and she decided to come at Lynchburg City School. So people do calculate, the total package, and the total package from us, we compensate through benefits for the lack what we have in terms of salaries.
Very true. And we want to be competitive. This will be my 9th time dealing with these budgets. I've seen it all over everywhere, papers all over everywhere. This is really good stuff. I want to do everything we can to get health insurance with no increases and 1550, and I want us to shoot for everything we can do until otherwise that we can't do it. And so, since we're not voting, I think you've got some direction, Dr. Edwards, the best I think we can do tonight. Is that all right?
Yeah, I don't know that I've heard everybody's voices,
Well, I
but
don't
I've
want
heard
to,
some voices.
wait, no,
that-
I don't want you to leave away thinking that, Ms. Bill Glory Preston, you got anything you want to say?
Just my political view says to me, if in fact you were gonna tell me you were gonna increase my health costs, I would probably be more in favor of it if you told me on the same day I was getting the raise, than if you told me next year when I wasn't getting the raise, and then you said, now we're gonna increase your health, because see, that kind of taking you in two different directions, and I think you'll hear about that later.
I thought we weren't doing a straw poll. So I was trying to be quiet, which is unusual. But if you want to do a straw,
But Randy, we really not doing a straw poll, I'm not gonna count them, but I think Dr. Edwards was very correct. Everybody should have given some input before I move on. Go ahead, Randy.
I think I love the idea of going and with the 1550 plan. I think if we go across the street and ask for that lofty goal, we need to show that we've come to the table. All these stakeholders need to have something on the table and present. And I think that way it's in my opinion, it'd be an easier sell when you go and ask for X number of millions of dollars. So my straw poll vote would be D. If you're asking them, just because I think, I hate to raise the healthcare also, but it is a reality, even though we are a self-funded plan. And I think it's maybe a little late in the process to look at the healthcare plan. I wish we could have done it sooner, because I think you're right, there's probably some efficiencies there that maybe we can carry over for the next year or two. So with that, I just think city council is gonna be saying, hey, everybody needs to have some skin in the game. And option D, hoping we get that $2 million kick in, shows that everybody has some skin in the game. And we do meet our lofty goal of 1550. I think that'll be a big feather in our cap. We're gonna get that.
Very good, Dr. Sinha.
Well, I'm with y'all, so I have asked in the finance committee meeting if we can find a way to get the detail and look at, is there a way that our employees are using healthcare, like going to an ER instead of an urgent care, for example, or not getting generics instead of what have you. Are our administrative costs out of line? Can we find a better manager for the program to really look at that in depth? And I'm hoping that we can get that kind of information and look at it, and perhaps maybe have a subcommittee or task force or whatever to look into that and examine those numbers in detail. Not being an insurer or know about diagnostics and what options there are, I'm not sure how exactly we go about that, but I think it's worth exploring and looking into to find ways that we can spend the money, make sure that our claims are the best way to expend that money. And we may find that there isn't a whole lot of room there. To assume that we're not spending it correctly, I think, is getting the cart ahead of the horse. We have to look at the data and see what's there.
Sure.
And that's definitely something we should do in the interest of keeping costs down. But the fact is, year over year, more is going out in claims than is coming in premiums, and it is unsustainable. So whether or not, and this is the facts, whether or not the raise comes in, and that's a justification for the raise, more or less, that everything's going up, everything costs more, and we also need to make this health insurance benefit that we provide that's quite generous and relative to other employers in the region, premiums are still very competitive and low. So there's great value in what we offer to employees. It's still, everybody's gonna have to share that burden. It's just an unfortunate fact of how things are going. So I wish I could say differently, but it's unsustainable, and we can't do that. So, yeah, for this year, we could probably find the 700,000 we want from our reserves or somehow, but again, that's just a one-time fix for this year, but going forward, unless we can find substantial savings in how we're administering and spending those benefits, that's gonna be an issue that'll come back again, and we'll still be at the same point where we're not collecting enough to cover claims for the year, so.
Very good. Did you have anything else?
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly, I think the other way to look at that is, because I agree with Mr. Trosa saying as far as having skin in the game, but, you know, to make the health insurance costs go away, either by doing something with our plan, wherever that would be, or taking $700,000 from the healthcare reserve for this year, one way or the other, we make that go away. So we're not going to the council and saying, in addition
yes.
to our, you know, because our costs are going to want to cover that also. So I'm fine with making it go away one way or the other. I just like it to be a practical and appropriate way to do it. We do with health insurance
Okay.
plan.
I can live with that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Brennan. And I do want, everybody's great comments, but I do want to make sure we hear what School Board Member Preston said. I think to me that's real. And we've been talking about sustainability for years, and I'm a firm believer in that. But that hadn't gotten us where we want to be yet. And if we do this, and then you have to do something else, the next iteration of the board needs to do some increasing of the premium, of the teacher's input or whomever. So be it. But we got to get where we got to get to. Dr. Carter, go ahead.
I don't have anything else.
Dr. Gupta, anything else?
Mine will be a Plan E,
Okay.
or A, B, C, D, E, which basically looks at
E.
Plan E, Echo.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Dr. Day, anything else? Well, I think you stated clearly. Okay. Mr. Andrews?
Oh, man. So time seems to be the factor, the underlying factor for me, right? And so if we had more time, I would say scenario C. You ask city council for the 8.5, you get the grocery tax money, you give that back to council out of good faith. That would make your scenario D the option. But if time is not, if we don't have the luxury of time and you have to go to the city tomorrow, I would say scenario B would be my primary choice because it includes insurance on our half. We still get the grocery money according to Dr. Carter. There's less of an ask from council. It's only a 7.1 ask in that retrospect. So just thinking logically, because time is of the essence, right? You're saying, I gotta go tomorrow, right? But if we had more time to work the plan out, I would say, go with scenario C, ask for council for the 8.5 because we may not get the grocery tax. But if we do, we give that back to council. There's a relationship there. Here you go. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for investing in us. But I will go with B.
Did you say B, did you say B or D?
I will go with B, scenario B as in Bravo.
Okay. All right. I'd never like to put the superintendent on the spot, so I'm not going to ask her anything other than everybody's giving the input.
Clear as mud.
Sorry. Yeah. We're not voting. Dr. Edwards, I hope that's helpful. I think that's the best we're going to be able to do tonight on this matter. And anyone else on this item? Did you want to say?
No.
Okay, good. All right. All right. Now, I do want to remind this board that, again, there are a lot of boards that spend hours and hours and hours and hours on this, and so it's a lot of work that goes into it, but I would appreciate it if we could move on. All right, very good. So this will take us to D3, the 23-24 draft calendar. And this is a first read according to what I'm looking at.
Yes. So, Ms. Phillips, and I'm in the wrong agenda, but Ms. Phillips came and presented on behalf of the calendar committee, and I just want to remind all of our viewers and listeners that the calendar committee includes parents, students, school board reps, as well as elementary, middle, and high school staff, and central office staff, and HR, as well as our community engagement liaison, as members of a calendar committee to try to do the best calendar that would meet the most amount of needs. So that calendar was presented to the school board last board meeting. We promised you that there will be 2 reads after that, so it's on for first read. We also sent something out to the community, because not every community member may have watched the school board and saw it, so we want to make sure that they at least put eyes on it. So it is back again for first read, and then it will be on the March agenda for a final adoption pending any changes or any recommendations.
Any thoughts, board members, concerning the calendar? Dr. Carter, and then Dr. Brennan.
First, I had looked at this and I said, no, I didn't notice any half-days, and I looked again in a few minutes, I did notice some. But this looks like a really good calendar with how the days are situated and the times that are built in with no students and the vacations, or times off. So we coordinated the spring holiday with all the other surrounding counties?
Okay, Dr. Brennan?
I think we did get input. I think Mr. Anthony and Mr. Joseph, I got input from one individual who's asking, I'm sorry, it's not on the screen anymore, but the question was that for the middle of January, where there's Martin Luther King Day on Monday, and then there's a professional day on Tuesday, that the students have just come back from a 2-week break. They're just kind of back in the swing of things. Is it a good idea to have a 4-day weekend in the middle of January rather than have it somewhere later in February? And obviously not talking about changing Martin Luther King Day, but maybe the 16th, which is the professional work day. I think, is that true?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I saw.
Yeah, maybe move it to President's Weekend.
Yeah, move it into February so that there wouldn't be such a long break. The other question was not starting so early, which I know the calendar committee has looked at, and I don't have any other comments about that, but I thought that was one that maybe should be brought to the administration.
Yeah, that's,
All right. I've got 3 pieces here, 2 pertaining to the calendar, and then a third one is kind of not related to the calendar, but it's calendar related. Here's the first one. When we look at December of 2023, you see that there is a break, the 18th, the 19th, the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd. And there's some thoughts to whether or not it might be beneficial for persons to work on the 18th and the 19th, or maybe even the 20th, and add some time back at the beginning of the year so that persons wouldn't be returning on the 2nd of January, but give them a little bit more time, and they would come back later in the week. That's something for contemplation. Number 2, Dr. Brennan just talked about the January the 15th time period. But it was brought to my attention that there doesn't appear, at least from the first look of the calendar, that the break of January the 15th is there for teachers maybe, or it is there. And then you don't get another break until April 1 through the 5th. And someone was suggesting that's a longer gap in between. And could it be possible that some other break could be sandwiched in between that time period? Just a thought, or rest for teachers and so forth. And then lastly, I don't know what Dr. Brennan did. Somebody talked to somebody so far. There's no snow that we've had up to this point. Maybe we will get some snow. But if we were to go through this school portion that we're in now, and there are no snow days at all, is there any way that persons could get in those days back before the end of this year?
See why you putting me on the spot.
And I'm just putting it out there. I'm not putting anything on you, just asking.
I think that's a balance of conversation, especially as we talk about learning recovery, instructional minutes, and looking at it through the lens of trying to catch up in time with our kids. And while I certainly am with my staff on, you know, a Good Friday off would be great and wonderful here and there, and you probably won't get an argument from me. I do have to consider, and we have considered the instructional minutes. Now, there will some that will say, well, we only need, you know, 180 days or 990 minutes, and that's on paper, but what do our individual students need in terms of instructional time? That's a conversation as we try to recover from the pandemic that just gives me pause.
Yep.
Got to see where we are. We just had a presentation on test scores and growth and everything, and we got to see our bubbles, and some of our bubbles were going in the opposite direction. So I think we need to do some work there with our kids as well.
All right, any other questions or thoughts that need to be brought up pertaining to the calendar or calendar-related matters? All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Edwards and staff, for giving attention to those concerns that have been brought up to the degree that it will be represented. And so am I understanding that in March 7th meeting, maybe whatever the date is, we would actually vote on the calendar?
Yes, so what we'll do is give that feedback back to the calendar committee. I know that they had some discussions, I don't know so much about the January 16th, but I can speak to the 2-week break during December, that they had some fruitful discussions about that, and they prioritized. But I will send everything back, and we'll see what they give us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edwards. All right, there doesn't appear to be any new policy updates, so I'm going to move beyond section E to F. And Dr. Edwards, do you want to say anything about tomorrow, or do we need to mention anything about that for board clarity?
Certainly. So tomorrow we're having a bus driver appreciation breakfast in the morning. If anybody wants to join us at the bus depot, I think that starts at 9 o'clock. Don't let me quote wrong as to that. And at 10 o'clock, maybe 8:30. I've got that backwards. 8:30 here. At 10 o'clock, Senator Kane is going to be visiting us, and we will be at Bass Elementary School. So those of you who were board members who signed up quick and early, because we had to send that guest list yesterday, he will be coming to read to our students, also engage with some of our parents, ourselves, board members, but also to talk a little bit about the electric school bus and our support of that and going green, and some of the other initiatives that he has that are very LCS favorable that we absolutely want to support. So that will be tomorrow at 10, starting at Bass Elementary School.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Also will remind the board that on February the 28th, we certainly are thankful to our mayor, the leadership of the mayor. Many of you were there that night, and so we are scheduled to have the fund balance issue on the agenda. And so if you would like, that's 7:30 meeting as I understand it, please come. And of course, whatever needs to be said, we welcome everyone's presence and potentially participation. So that's February 28th. Next school board meeting is the 7th of March. Legislative advocacy has been canceled in light of, is that correct, Dr. Carter?
That's correct.
Yeah. Mhm. And the finance and facilities meeting then will take place at that time. Public budget hearing, you see that for the 21st of March. And the next school board work session will be the 21st. Finance and facilities on the 28th. And then make sure you got on your calendar now the joint city council school meeting at 4 o'clock on March the 28th. Having said that, meeting is adjourned.